Indonesia is a football nation. In fact, it's a football-crazy nation. Whenever the Indonesian national team plays at home in Jakarta, the stadium's atmosphere is always on another level as the whole country unites to support the national team. It's an experience one wouldn't necessarily expect from a country that has never qualified for the World Cup, particularly since its independence in August 1945. But when it comes to its local leagues, that unity is divided in a way that is almost incomprehensible to outsiders. And no, this isn't just normal rivalry like we often see in many other football countries around the world. The rivalries between Indonesian clubs are so dangerous and deadly that not even the loss of 135 lives at Kanjuruhan could break the cycle of violence. Because for the Indonesian hardcore supporters, football is less about the game itself and more about defending an identity. It's a battle to protect what they call Harga Diri, a term that translates literally word by word as self-price, but is understood as the value of one's dignity. And this is the core reason why Indonesian supporters tend to be violent. Even though Harga Diri is a universal human value, its complex entanglement with group identity in Indonesia requires a look back at the Dutch colonial era. Before the Dutch, the Indonesian archipelago was a dynamic region with numerous often rival kingdoms. The colonial administration then forged these disparate territories into a single, centralized system under one exploitative command. This, however, was not a genuine national unity. The Dutch strategically used identity as a tool to divide and rule, mainly emphasizing regional, ethnic, and religious differences to prevent a unified front from challenging their authority. And over generations, this system created hardened identities. A person's tribe was no longer just about where they lived or where they came from, it became a social status that had to be defended at all costs. And when Indonesia gained its independence in 1945, the Founding Fathers faced a massive challenge to unify hundreds of ethnic groups and languages, each with its own distinct values and cultures. The Founding Fathers needed something to hold it together, so they pushed nationalism and promoted a unified Indonesian identity with Garuda as the symbol and Bhinneka Tunggal Ika as the slogan, a phrase that translates to unity in diversity. But even though this spirit of unity helped stabilize the country, the old identities didn't go away as easily. People still think of themselves as Javanese, Sundanese, Balinese, Papuan, and so on. They channeled the very idea of nationalism inward and empowered a fierce local patriotism. Therefore, defending their local origin is often more important than defending the nation's unifying spirit itself. This is what separates Indonesia from fierce rivalries in other football countries, where the fights are often about class or local pride within a settled national identity, not from a fractured one like in Indonesia. The nationhood itself was built on fragile unity. So when football became the space to express what colonialism and nationalism had suppressed, it tapped into a much deeper well of hatred. In other words, football in Indonesia is like a continuation of a much older colonial war, and the stadium itself becomes the arena where the unfinished business of divide and rule policy plays out. That interplay between colonial stratification, post-independence nationalism, and local pride is what set up a culture where Harga Diri isn't just something personal. It belongs to their group, to their football club that serves as the main representation of their region. And when some outsiders disrespect the club, that Harga Diri must be defended. And this exact nature to protect dignity is what often leads to violence. In fact, the violence doesn't only happen in the stadium, because no matter if there's a match or not, wearing the wrong jersey in the wrong neighborhood can be a death wish. In February 2025, for instance, a man was attacked at Jatinegara station in East Jakarta simply for wearing a Persib Bandung jersey by a group of Persija Jakarta supporters. That man turned out to be a mute person, therefore he couldn't defend himself nor explain the situation. And back in September 2018, a Persija fan named Haringga Sirila was beaten to death by Persib fans outside the stadium in Bandung. He went to support his club and wasn't even wearing any of Persija's attributes, as he intended to blend with the Persib crowd. But one of the Persib fans noticed that he was a guy from Jakarta, then they beat him to death as he was walking into the stadium. Clashes like this happens often all over Indonesia, as long as there are two clubs from different cities with close proximity competing in the same league. Things can get even worse when an attack on an individual is interpreted as an attack on the entire fan base, which often leads to a cycle of retaliation to restore the Harga Diri. And if combined with systemic corruption within the federation, organized thuggery within fan bases, media who profit from divisive headlines, and a security approach that treats the crowd as enemies to suppress rather than civilians to protect, the cycle of violence becomes almost impossible to break. This culture of endless retaliatory violence eventually culminated in the Kanjuruhan tragedy on October 1, 2022. A clash between two clubs separated by only 90 kilometers, in a match infamous as the East Java Super Derby. Arema, representing the city of Malang, were seen as the younger rebellious team, while Persebaya from the city of Surabaya carried the legacy and pride of the provincial capital. The hostility and hatred between both fan bases were deep and almost certain to create chaos. Persebaya's supporters are called Bonek, short for Bondo Nekat, which roughly means ready to dare anything, and Arema's fans are called Aremania, a name that speaks for itself. The animosity between these two was so dangerous that both fans had been banned from attending away matches since 1998 following an agreement between both parties, and later reinforced in 2006 after a clash that set Surabaya on fire. That's why, on this night, no Bonek were allowed inside or in the proximity of the stadium. Only Aremania were present. The logic was that keeping one side out would keep things peaceful. On paper that made complete sense, but in reality it created a tinderbox as they had a massive, amped-up crowd buzzing with aggressive energy, fueled by a historic rivalry with the other side completely absent. So the potential was now there for all that aggression to boil over in an unpredictable, self-destructive way. And the authorities were well aware of the danger since the match had always been classified as high risk. The security was super tight, with over 2,000 personnel deployed, including around 300 from mobile brigades, 1,300 regular police, 360 army soldiers, and 250 stewards. For a football match, this might sound excessive, but it was necessary since the tension every time these two clubs meet is always extreme, so extreme that the away team had to come and go in armored vehicles. Even weeks before kickoff, there were warnings from the organizers. During a coordination meeting on September 15th, police, local officials, and club representatives had all agreed to follow FIFA safety regulations and not use tear gas inside the stadium. Then, the police made another critical request to move the game in the afternoon since Kanjuruhan's lighting was poor and exits were hard to monitor at night. That proposal was rejected by the league's operator because the match time had already been set for television. The real reason, however, was widely reported and speculated that the official broadcaster Indosiar had insisted on a prime-time slot to secure higher viewership and advertising revenue. This decision is crucial because a night game meant a more volatile crowd, a slower emergency response, a more aggressive police mindset, and a far more difficult evacuation. But the decision had been made, and so the match kicked off at 8 p.m. The atmosphere was already tense from the beginning, especially after Persebaya scored the first goal at the 7th minute and scored again at the 32nd. But Arema fought back and equalized the score with 2 goals right before halftime. In the second half, the atmosphere became even more heated after Persebaya scored their 3rd goal, and Arema failed to equalize the score. Disappointed and angry faces were visible among the fans, and they kept chanting in a hostile manner. Chants like "Fuck Bonek, just kill them" were shouted, over and over. And around the stadium, fans hung banners written in hostile language. One of them is this, which could be translated to "Your doomsday is in Malang." This was a direct response to the huge banner Bonek always displays at their home games, which translates to Persebaya until doomsday comes. And the crowd's fury escalated to the point of becoming deadly after Persebaya won the game. It was a big deal for both teams because Persebaya had never won at Kanjuruhan in 23 years. But as much as they wanted to celebrate the victory, they had to run for their lives to the dressing room and were given about 5 minutes in there as the organizers ordered them to be evacuated as soon as possible. And on the pitch, some Arema players walked toward the supporters' tribune to apologize for the defeat. That's when the first wave of fans broke through the barriers. The official report estimates around 200 people entered the field in the first few minutes. Most of them weren't armed, and their initial actions weren't overtly aggressive. But the situation changed in an instant when several individuals went straight to attack the players. And in response to this, security forces tried to push the fans back toward the stands, but they were quickly overwhelmed as more and more people invaded the pitch. Some of the security forces began hitting a few fans and then breached the pre-match safety agreement by firing the first tear gas canisters onto the field, even though it was initially aimed to drive the crowd away from players and officials. But just a few short minutes later, the strategy shifted drastically as several police officers began launching tear gas canisters near the packed stands to prevent more people from invading the pitch. Some even aimed directly toward the stands packed with people who had done nothing but watch. At least 45 canisters were fired into sections 10, 11, 12, and 13. Those closest to the field turned and ran back toward the stands. The ones higher up ran down toward the exit tunnels, trying to get out before the gas reached them, since it only took 2 short minutes for the visibility and breathability to be almost gone completely. But as desperately as they looked for an escape, they had nowhere to go. The gates were either partially open or locked completely. And at this point, those at the front were pinned against the gates, and those in the back kept pushing toward the exit gate, desperate for fresh air. A deadly crush was now inevitable. When the tear gas was fired, Gate 13 was closed. Gate 12 was only half open, and Gate 10 was padlocked shut. To make matters worse, the stewards tasked with guarding these exits had abandoned their posts as soon as the gas started spreading and were nowhere to be found. Multiple witnesses stated that the gates, particularly Gate 13, had actually been opened 5 to 10 minutes before the game ended. But for some unknown reason, it was locked again shortly after the tear gas were shot. This crucial fact, which led to dozens of fatalities, remains a mystery in Indonesia. Even the official investigation couldn't determine whether the gate was open or not when the calamity happened. Meanwhile, the situation outside the stadium was already out of control, with thousands of angry people ready to vent their rage at Persebaya's convoy. Internal documentary from the official Persebaya account showed how frightening it was. People were throwing rocks and paving blocks at their armored vehicles. Some police escort cars were burned. And there were even attempts to burn military trucks used for transporting logistics, despite the fact that members of Persebaya's logistics team being inside. This documentary was published 25 days after the tragedy took place, and eventually became a turning point of public perspective. Those who initially fully blamed the tragedy on police brutality now understood the extreme pressure and chaos the security forces faced that night, while making it clear that nothing could justify the decision to fire tear gas into a packed crowd. In total, 135 people lost their lives at Kanjuruhan. 42 of them were children. And after the investigation was completed, 5 people were charged. 3 of them were officers who ordered their units to shoot the tear gas, and the other 2 were match officials. No one from Aremania was charged with causing the deaths or triggering the gas deployment. The stadium itself underwent renovations to fully meet FIFA safety standards. But after the work was complete, and on the very first match Arema could finally play again at Kanjuruhan, this happened. The opponent's bus from Persik Diri was heading back to the hotel after the match on May 11, 2025. But not long after leaving the stadium area, some Aremania, who were already waiting on the roadside, threw a rock at the window that hit the head of Persik's head coach Divaldo Alves. He suffered a minor head injury, and the reaction from one of his own players summed up the feeling of the entire nation in just 3 words: that we never learned. And he was right. Another incident that happened a few months later in August proved his very point, but this time it was more massive. A newly promoted team from Yogyakarta was playing at home against Persib Bandung. While there were conflicting statements of what caused the violence, the underlying context was clear, that in response to the Kanjuruhan tragedy, the federation had implemented a new league-wide regulation banning all away supporters from the stadium. But even still, some of them showed up, either attempting to enter the stadium or just gathering nearby. Then, just after the game ended, a bus carrying about 50 Persib supporters was followed by groups of Yogyakarta fans, and when the bus accidentally hit one of the motorcycles, the situation instantly escalated into violence. 2 vehicles were severely damaged, and supporters from both sides clashed at multiple points around the city, forcing the police to deploy tactical units to disperse the crowds. The clash in Yogyakarta didn't really surprise anyone in Indonesia, not at all. It was the same kind of accident people had seen 100 times before, just in a different city, with different jerseys, with the same story playing out again and again. Because here in Indonesia, football violence isn't a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it doesn't happen because of one bad game or one emotional night. It's the eruption of decades of hatred and fractured identity, all funneling into an arena that gives them permission to fight a proxy war born from colonial division. And the stadium itself becomes the last sanctuary where losing control is mistaken for loyalty. So when people say we never learned, they're not wrong. You can give the stadium new walls, new seats, new gates, and even call it a new beginning. But a new everything won't mean a thing if the same old sickness still lives inside. And the words, never again, will always become again, and again. Because if a man still believes that defending his club's honor is worth throwing a rock at someone's head, no renovation will ever be enough. No regulation changes will ever be enough. Every football match will just be another Kanjuruhan waiting for its night. And that's what makes it tragic. But it doesn't always have to be that way. Everyone can see the hope already that the vast majority of fan bases began promoting anti-violence campaign, and the chants inside stadiums are starting to be about solidarity and unity instead of direct death threat to rival enemies. And that is my hope, that football can finally be treated as an entertainment, not a war to defend one's dignity. This is my love letter to Indonesia, and I'm signing off.